The Runcorn Poltergeist of Byron Street. The industrial town of Runcorn in Cheshire, England, was characterized in the early 1950s by its chemical works, tanneries, and rows of terraced housing that defined the working-class landscape of the post-war era. Among these rows stood Byron Street, a nondescript collection of brick dwellings that differed little from the thousands of other homes housing families recovering from the austerity of the preceding decade. Number 1, Byron Street was occupied by the Crowther family, an extended household consisting of John Crowther, his wife Ellen, and their 17-year-old grandson, Samuel Jones. The residence was typical of the region, featuring a cramped layout with a downstairs living area, a scullery, and bedrooms on the upper floor. It was a home marked by domestic routine and stability until the late summer of 1952. When it became the epicenter of a series of physical anomalies that would eventually draw the attention of local law enforcement, the national press, and thousands of spectators. The events began in mid-August, manifesting initially as auditory disturbances that the family struggled to identify or locate within the structure of the house. The sounds were described as scratching noises, distinct from the settling of foundations or the movement of vermin emanating from the walls and the ceiling of the upper bedrooms. These auditory phenomena were sporadic at first, occurring primarily during the evening hours when the household had settled for the night. John Crowther, a man of practical temperament, initially dismissed the noises as the result of drafts or the aging infrastructure of the property. However, the intensity of the sounds escalated over the course of a week, transitioning from faint scratching to loud, rhythmic thuds that vibrated through the floorboards and could be felt by those standing in the rooms below. The situation shifted from auditory to kinetic on a Saturday evening, marking the transition from a domestic annoyance to a phenomenon that defied immediate explanation. Samuel Jones, who slept in one of the upstairs bedrooms, reported that his bed had begun to vibrate violently without any apparent mechanical cause. The shaking was not a subtle tremor, but a forceful oscillation that caused the iron frame of the bed to rattle against the floorboards. Ellen Crowther, upon entering the room to investigate the commotion, witnessed the movement firsthand. She observed the heavy piece of furniture lifting momentarily from the floor before settling back down with a heavy thud. There were no wires, no pulleys, and no other individuals in the room capable of exerting the force required to manipulate the bed. The disturbances quickly spread beyond the confines of Samuel's bedroom. In the kitchen and the living room, small household objects began to exhibit autonomous movement. Crockery left on the drying rack in the scullery was heard clattering together when no one was present in the room. When the family investigated, they found plates and cups rearranged or placed on the floor without breakage, as if they had been lowered by an invisible hand. This initial phase of the haunting was characterized by a sense of playfulness or mischief rather than malice, but the sheer impossibility of the events began to erode the psychological resilience of the household. The Crowthers were not prone to superstition, yet the cumulative weight of these occurrences forced them to seek external assistance. The family turned to the local police, a decision that moved the case from the realm of private folklore to official public record. The involvement of the Cheshire Constabulary provided a layer of credible witness testimony that is often absent in similar cases. Officers were dispatched to the property on Byron Street to investigate reports of a domestic disturbance. Upon arrival, they found a household in a state of high anxiety. The officers, expecting to find evidence of practical jokes or domestic disputes, conducted a thorough search of the premises. They checked floorboards for loose planks, examined the attic for intruders, and inspected the walls for hidden mechanisms. No rational cause for the noises or movements could be identified. It was during these police vigils that the phenomena escalated in both frequency and violence. Constable Arthur Tavis was among the first law enforcement officials to witness the events directly. In his reports, he described sitting in the kitchen with the family when he observed a heavy wooden table lift several inches off the ground. The movement was smooth and sustained, hovering for a moment before dropping back to the linoleum. Tavis, a trained observer accustomed to dealing with tangible criminality, found himself unable to account for the physics of what he had seen. He checked for wires and magnets, finding nothing. The table was a solid piece of furniture, requiring significant effort to lift by hand, yet it had moved silently and without apparent leverage. The activity in the house appeared to focus heavily on the presence of Samuel Jones. The 17-year-old became the primary target of the kinetic energy that permeated the residence. Objects would frequently fly across the room in his direction, though they rarely caused him serious physical injury. On one occasion, a heavy dictionary was observed by multiple witnesses to slide off a shelf and traverse the air in an arc, landing at the boy's feet. The trajectory of the object was described as unnatural, lacking the ballistic curve that would be expected if it had been thrown by a human hand. Instead, it appeared to glide, carried by a force that manipulated its speed and direction mid-flight. As news of the disturbances leaked to the wider community, the quiet routine of Byron Street was shattered. Neighbors began to gather outside the house, hoping to catch a glimpse of the phenomena or to hear the strange noises that had been reported. The crowd grew from a few dozen curiosity seekers to hundreds of people, blocking the road and requiring police intervention to maintain public order. The presence of the crowd added a layer of chaotic energy to the environment. The police were forced to manage not only the inexplicable events inside the house, but also the potential for civil unrest outside. The Crowther family found themselves under siege, trapped between the paranormal activity within their walls and the voyeuristic attention of the public without. Inside the house, the phenomena continued to defy the laws of physics. Another police officer, Constable Grieve, reported witnessing a chest of drawers in the upstairs bedroom moving across the floor. The chest, which was filled with clothing and heavy linens, weighed a considerable amount. Grieve watched as it inched forward, grinding against the floorboards, while Samuel Jones lay in his bed on the opposite side of the room. The officer verified that there were no strings attached to the furniture and that the floor was level. The movement was accompanied by a distinctive scraping sound that could be heard clearly in the silence of the room. This incident, recorded in official notebooks, remains one of the most compelling pieces of evidence from the Runcorn case. The nature of the disturbances began to change as the weeks progressed. The initial movements of furniture gave way to the teleportation of objects, a phenomenon known in parapsychology as apports. Items that had been secure in closed drawers would suddenly appear on tabletops or on the floor in different rooms. Coins, buttons, and small trinkets materialized in midair, dropping onto hard surfaces with audible clicks. On one occasion, a timepiece that had been sitting on the mantelpiece in the living room was found smashed on the floor of the scullery, despite no one having passed between the two rooms. The violence of the destruction was notable. The internal mechanism of the clock had been shattered, suggesting it had been subjected to significant force. The psychological toll on the Crowther family became increasingly evident. John Crowther, initially the skeptic, was worn down by the lack of sleep and the constant tension of anticipating the next event. Ellen Crowther expressed fear for the safety of her grandson, who seemed to be the lightning rod for the activity. Samuel himself became withdrawn, his health deteriorating under the stress of the constant scrutiny and the terrifying nature of the phenomena. The family attempted to maintain a semblance of normalcy, but the unpredictable nature of the poltergeist made daily life impossible. Meals were interrupted by flying cutlery, sleep was broken by pounding on the walls, and the police presence became a permanent fixture in their lives. In an attempt to cleanse the house, the family allowed a local medium to visit. The spiritualist attempted to communicate with the entity, conducting a séance in the living room while police officers stood guard. The results were inconclusive but dramatic. During the session, the temperature in the room reportedly dropped significantly, a phenomenon often associated with paranormal activity. Those present described a sensation of heavy static in the air, similar to the feeling preceding a thunderstorm. The medium claimed to sense a confused and energetic presence, but no clear identity or motive could be established. The séance did nothing to quell the disturbances. In fact, the activity seemed to spike in intensity in the days immediately following the intervention. The climax of the haunting occurred in late September. The violence of the phenomena reached a peak during a night of sustained activity that lasted for several hours. Witnesses reported a cacophony of sounds, including the smashing of glass, the banging of doors, and a low, guttural vibration that seemed to emanate from the foundations of the house itself. During this episode, 2 police officers were present in the bedroom with Samuel. They watched as the heavy iron bed was lifted entirely off the floor, hovering for several seconds before crashing down. Simultaneously, the curtains were ripped from their rails and the windows shattered outwards, showering the street below with glass. The sheer energy required to produce these effects was terrifying to behold, and the officers later admitted to feeling a profound sense of helplessness in the face of such force. Following this crescendo of activity, the phenomena began to taper off as abruptly as they had begun. The frequency of the events diminished, with days passing between incidents. The scratching in the walls became fainter, the movement of objects became less ambitious, and the atmosphere in the house began to lighten. By mid-October, the disturbances had largely ceased. The police withdrew their constant guard, the crowds dispersed, and the media interest moved on to other stories. The Crowther family was left to pick up the pieces of their shattered domestic life, living in a house that still bore the physical scars of the haunting. The Runcorn poltergeist case remains a subject of fascination due to the quality and reliability of the witnesses involved. Unlike many cases that rely solely on the testimony of emotional family members, the events at Byron Street were corroborated by multiple police officers, neighbors, and independent observers. The official police reports filed by Constables Tavis and Grieve provide a sober, factual account of impossible events. These officers had no motive to fabricate such stories. Indeed, filing reports about flying furniture and ghost-like phenomena put their professional credibility at risk. Their willingness to document what they saw speaks to the undeniable reality of the physical events they witnessed. Skeptics at the time attempted to attribute the phenomena to the teenage Samuel Jones, suggesting that he was unconsciously manipulating the environment or engaging in trickery. The theory of recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, RSPK, was often cited, suggesting that the repressed emotional energy of adolescence could manifest as external kinetic force. However, this theory failed to account for incidents that occurred when Samuel was asleep, immobilized, or in full view of observers who confirmed he was not moving. The sheer mass of the objects moved heavy chests, iron beds, solid tables exceeded the physical capacity of a 17-year-old boy to manipulate without detection, particularly in a small room filled with police officers. The structural integrity of 1 Byron Street was also examined. Surveyors looked for subsidence, underground watercourses, or nearby industrial vibrations that could explain the shaking and the noise. Runcorn was an industrial town, and the ground was often subject to the tremors of heavy machinery. Yet, the localized nature of the disturbance was the counterpoint to this argument. The shaking was confined to specific rooms and specific objects. The house next door, attached by a party wall, experienced none of the violent phenomena reported by the Crowthers. If the cause were geological or industrial, it would have affected the entire terrace row, not just a single residence. The aftermath of the haunting left a permanent mark on the community. The residents of Byron Street looked at the Crowther house with a mixture of suspicion and awe for years after the events concluded. The family themselves never fully recovered from the trauma of those 2 months. They continued to live in the house, bound by economic necessity, but the home was never again a place of comfort. Samuel Jones eventually moved away, leaving Runcorn and the memories of the haunting behind him. He rarely spoke of the events in later life, preferring to distance himself from the notoriety that had surrounded his adolescence. The documentation of the case in the local archives of the Runcorn Weekly News and the records of the Cheshire Constabulary preserves the details of the investigation. These records describe a methodical attempt by 1950s law enforcement to apply logic and procedure to the irrational. The reports detail the measurements taken, the searches conducted, and the eventual admission that the police were powerless to stop the disturbances. There were no arrests made, no charges filed, and no culprit identified. The file was eventually closed not because the mystery was solved, but because the phenomena simply stopped happening. One specific incident, detailed in the later stages of the investigation, involved a heavy porcelain sink in the scullery. Witnesses reported that the sink was wrenched from the wall brackets, severing the lead pipes and causing a flood in the kitchen. The force required to detach the fixtures was immense, twisting the metal and shattering the ceramic. This event occurred while the family was in the living room listening to the radio. The sound of the destruction brought them running, only to find the room empty of any intruder. The water gushed onto the floor, mixing with the debris of the shattered sink. It was a display of raw, destructive power that served no apparent purpose other than to terrify and destroy. The unpredictability of the poltergeist was its most defining feature. There was no pattern to the activity, no trigger that could be avoided. It could happen in the bright light of midday or the dead of night. It could be a subtle tap on the shoulder or the violent overturning of a wardrobe. This randomness created an atmosphere of perpetual dread. The family could never relax, never feel safe within their own walls. Every creak of a floorboard, every rattle of a window pane became a potential prelude to chaos. This psychological siege is a common thread in poltergeist cases, but the intensity of it at Byron Street was particularly acute due to the small size of the house and the number of people living there. The case also highlighted the social dynamics of the era. The reliance on the police as the ultimate authority figures meant that their inability to solve the problem was deeply unsettling for the community. In 1952, the police were seen as the guardians of order. For them to be baffled, to stand in a kitchen and watch a table float without explanation, undermined the perceived stability of the world. It suggested that there were forces at play that were beyond the reach of the law, beyond the understanding of the state. This realization rippled through the conservative, working-class community of Runcorn, fueling rumors and speculation that persisted for decades. In the years that followed, researchers of the paranormal have revisited the Runcorn case, comparing it to other famous poltergeist outbreaks. It shares many characteristics with the Enfield poltergeist, which would occur decades later: the focus on a young person, the movement of heavy furniture, the police witnesses. However, the Runcorn case lacks the audio recordings and the photographic evidence that defined later hauntings. It exists primarily in the written word, in the notebooks of constables, the columns of newspapers, and the memories of those who stood outside on the pavement listening to the banging from within. This lack of visual media gives the story a stark, gritty quality, stripped of the sensationalism that accompanies modern investigations. The physical environment of the house played a crucial role in the narrative. The tight, enclosed spaces of a terraced home meant that there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The proximity of the neighbors meant that privacy was impossible. The haunting was a communal event, experienced by the family but witnessed, in part, by the street. The sounds of the poltergeist traveled through the thin walls, keeping neighbors awake and spreading fear through the row. It was a haunting that occupied a specific physical and social space, deeply rooted in the reality of 1950s industrial England. There remains a subset of reports from the case that discuss the manipulation of light. On several occasions, witnesses described glowing orbs or patches of luminosity appearing in the upper rooms. These lights were described as soft and diffuse, hovering near the ceiling before fading away. Unlike the violent kinetic phenomena, these visual anomalies were silent and transient. They were less frequently reported than the moving furniture, but added a layer of high strangeness to the case. The police reports make brief mention of unexplained luminescence, a dry, bureaucratic phrase that attempts to categorize the impossible. The culmination of the Runcorn poltergeist was not a dramatic exorcism or a fiery finale, but a slow fade into silence. The energy seemed to exhaust itself. The terror of August and September gave way to a quiet October. The family, battered and exhausted, slowly returned to a routine that would never be quite the same. The furniture was repaired, the glass replaced, and the police patrols resumed their normal beats. But the questions remained. What had happened at 1 Byron Street? What force had been capable of lifting a bed with a person in it? What had caused a dictionary to fly with intelligent aim? Even today, the Byron Street disturbance stands as a stubborn anomaly. It resists the easy dismissal of fraud due to the number and character of the witnesses. It resists the explanation of natural causes due to the specific, intelligent nature of the movements. It sits in the gray area of history, a documented sequence of events that occurred in the real world but cannot be reconciled with the laws of that world. It is a reminder that even in the most mundane settings, in a brick terrace in an industrial town, the fabric of reality can sometimes tear, revealing something incomprehensible underneath. The legacy of the case is silence. The house eventually changed hands, the street was modernized, and the story faded from the daily conversation of the town. Yet, in the archives of psychical research and local history, the Runcorn poltergeist remains a heavyweight case. It is a testament to the strangeness of the human experience, a narrative of fear and confusion played out against the backdrop of a changing Britain. It is a story without a villain, without a hero, and without a resolution. It is simply a record of things that happened, things that should not have been possible, but were witnessed by those who were there. Missing without a trace. On a clear Saturday in late September, Evan Rourke, 34, vanished near Bend in Central Oregon, reportedly without witnesses. Rourke was an environmental consultant from Salem hired to survey post-fire erosion patterns along a mapped section of the Deschutes National Forest. He arrived alone, carrying a day pack, 2 liters of water, and a printed topo map marked with 3 waypoints. Dispatch logs later placed his last confirmed phone ping near the Cascade Lakes corridor, but state records list a different sector. Investigators noted the mismatch early, and archived notes show the discrepancy persisted through multiple updates. He checked into a modest motel in Bend on Friday evening, then texted a coworker that the route looked straightforward and short. County file from 2009 described the same drainage as deceptively steep with loose pumice under shallow roots. Rourke told friends he planned to hike at first light, collect photos, then be back for a Sunday meeting. Some locals claimed the trail was crowded that weekend, yet the first interviews produced no solid sightings. Records conflict on whether he signed a trail register because the book was reportedly missing pages. At 6:10 a.m. on Saturday, Rourke's phone connected briefly, then fell silent after one last outgoing message that was never delivered. Mara Ivers, 32, a nurse and longtime friend in Bend, expected him for coffee at 9:00 a.m. and waited past 1030. She called twice, then left a voicemail asking for a quick location update and a safety check. When she drove toward the lakes, she found no clear parking match because several pullouts shared similar gravel shoulders. She later told deputies she felt uneasy, yet she did not report him missing until that evening. The first formal call came at 7:42 p.m. when Ivers contacted Deschutes County Dispatch and said Rourke had not returned. Dispatch logs show a brief intake, then a request for vehicle description, clothing colors, and planned route notes. Ivers reported he wore a dark shell jacket, tan hiking pants, and carried a small red first aid pouch. A deputy advised waiting through the night, citing adult autonomy, but also logged the case as a welfare concern. By sunrise Sunday, the report shifted to a missing person entry. Search crews began with the most probable trailheads using Rourke's earlier text and a screenshot of his hand-marked map. A volunteer team found his rented sedan by mid-morning, though the exact pullout name differs across documents. One report places the car near a popular loop. Another places it closer to a service road used for forest access. The vehicle was locked and nothing looked disturbed, according to state records. A single boot print was photographed near the shoulder, but the print was not conclusively matched. Investigators canvassed nearby hikers, bike riders, and anglers, focusing on anyone who saw a lone man with a day pack. Several witnesses described a similar figure, yet their time estimates varied by more than 3 hours. Some locals claimed they heard someone shout around midday, but investigators never confirmed the source or location. Wind conditions were moderate that day, and sound carries unpredictably through pumice flats and tree breaks. Dispatch logs mention a possible whistle signal, though no responder verified hearing it. By Sunday afternoon, a dog team worked a scent article from Rourke's motel room using a pillowcase and a worn shirt. The dogs reportedly showed interest near the car, then pulled west along a shallow draw before losing the track at Volcanic Rock. County file from 2009 warned that scent work often fails near porous lava because air pockets scatter odor. A helicopter unit circled the area twice, and crews marked drainage junctions with flagging for repeated sweeps. No confirmed clothing, gear, or blood sign was located in the first 48 hours. On Monday, Rourke's employer provided his project file, including planned coordinates and a short risk assessment checklist. The coordinates overlapped with a burn scar from 2021 where standing dead trees can fall without warning. Archive notes show a ranger advised extra caution, yet the same notes say Rourke insisted he would remain on established paths. State records list a separate coordinate set, reportedly copied from an early email draft. Investigators never confirmed which set guided his actual steps. The conflicting data, complicated grid planning, and delayed deeper canyon assignments. Ivers gave a detailed statement describing Rourke as cautious, experienced, and not prone to impulsive detours. She said he rarely drank alcohol and he avoided risky solo scrambles after a minor ankle sprain in 2019. Deputies asked about mental health, financial stress, and recent conflicts, and she reported none that seemed urgent. Phone records showed no unusual call pattern in the week before, according to a later summary. Still, some locals claimed he argued with someone at a gas station, but no camera footage confirmed it. By Tuesday, the sheriff's office expanded the search perimeter to include waterways, culverts, and old logging spurs. A diver team checked a small reservoir edge because a witness thought they saw a man near the bank earlier Saturday. Investigators never confirmed that identification, and the time window did not match the phone ping estimates. Dispatch logs note repeated confusion about which ping source was used, tower triangulation or handset-assisted location. The report eventually listed both, without clarifying which one was treated as primary. Records conflict again, and the conflict never fully resolves in later summaries. A separate angle focused on the car, including rental paperwork, mileage, and any trace evidence inside. The odometer reading appeared inconsistent between the impound intake and the rental return form. One deputy wrote that the difference suggested extra driving, but a later memo said the initial reading was likely recorded incorrectly. The trunk contained a sealed equipment case with survey flags, gloves, and a compact camera tripod. Nothing was missing that clearly explained why Rourke would abandon a planned short loop. On Wednesday, crews found a small pile of survey flagging about 2 miles from the vehicle, tied to a branch at waist height. The flagging color matched the employer's supply, but that color is common among contractors and hunters. No fingerprints were recovered, reportedly due to weather exposure and handling risk. The branch location sat near an unmarked junction, where a faint user path leads towards steeper terrain. Some locals claimed that path is used to reach an overlook, yet the overlook name varies across guides. Investigators marked the junction as a priority, and the next day's plan centered there. Thursday brought a shift in weather, with intermittent rain and colder air moving over the Cascades. Search leaders noted that survivability decreases when nights drop and clothing becomes wet, though no conclusion was stated. A second dog team attempted a fresh track using a boot from the motel and reportedly indicated along the same draw as before. The track again ended near broken rock and dense brush, and the handler reported wind shear that could distort scent. Helicopter flights were limited because visibility dropped and the tree canopy trapped shadows. During interviews, investigators asked about possible voluntary disappearance, and the question remained open in some archived notes. Rourke had no known history of leaving work without notice, and his bank activity showed no unusual withdrawals, according to a later county summary. Phone data showed no new device pairing, and his social accounts were inactive after the hike window. Still, state records include a brief mention of a possible ride offered by a stranger based on a single unverified tip. Investigators never confirmed the tipster's identity, and the note appears only once. That single line later fueled speculation, despite lacking supporting detail. A week after the disappearance, the sheriff's office released a public request for information, naming the Bend region and nearby forest corridors. The release described Rourke's height, clothing, and vehicle, and asked for any dashcam footage from Saturday morning. Several people submitted clips, but the clips mostly showed traffic near lakes and trailheads with no clear match. A ranger noted that many pullouts have similar volcanic cinder surfaces, making vehicle placement hard to confirm. Dispatch logs record dozens of calls, yet only 2 were treated as credible enough for follow-up. Both follow-ups ended without confirmation. 2 weeks in, a volunteer group organized an informal sweep focusing on ravines and deadfall pockets beyond official grids. Search managers cautioned against uncontrolled searching because it can contaminate evidence trails and strain resources. Even so, volunteers reportedly found a torn snack wrapper and a crushed water bottle in a brush line. The items were photographed, but ownership could not be attributed because the brands were widely used. Investigators logged them as found property, not definitive evidence tied to Rourke. Some locals claimed the bottle matched his style, yet no serial or unique mark supported that claim. A month later, investigators revisited the case file, consolidating maps, pings, and witness timelines into a single narrative. That narrative still carried contradictions, including 2 different last known times within the same paragraph of a memo. Archived notes show an internal discussion about whether the phone ping was delayed due to network congestion. Investigators never confirmed that theory, and no provider statement appears in the public record summary. County file from 2009 included a similar confusion in an older case where pings were logged after actual movement. The older file was cited as context, not as proof of any pattern here. In late autumn, a hunter reported seeing a lone backpack near a downed log, several miles from the first search perimeter. A deputy and ranger followed the report, but they found only an older pack with a missing strap and no identifying contents. Dispatch logs show the call was closed as unrelated, though one note suggested the area should be rechecked in spring. Records conflict about whether that spring check happened because one schedule lists it and another shows it canceled. Ivers later told a reporter she felt the case slipped into administrative limbo, but investigators did not comment. The official file continued to list Rourke as missing, with no confirmed remains or personal effects recovered. Over time, the working explanations narrowed to accident, medical event, or an unconfirmed human encounter, each constrained by missing data. The terrain contains steep drop-offs, hidden cavities in lava, and dense brush that can conceal a person within yards of a path. Yet the absence of clear gear, consistent tracks, or verified witness contact kept every path uncertain. Some locals claimed there were signs the search missed, while others claimed the area is so harsh that evidence disappears quickly. Investigators never confirmed either claim, and the file remains defined by gaps, conflicting timestamps, and unresolved location records. Reportedly, the last reliable fact is still the locked car near Bend, waiting where it was left. The Echoes of Langenhoe. The landscape of the Essex coastline in the eastern United Kingdom is defined by its flatness, a sprawling expanse of marshland and estuary that blurs the line between earth and water. It is a region where the sky dominates the horizon, pressing down upon the low-lying fens and tidal creeks that weave through the geography like veins. During the autumn and winter months, a pervasive mist frequently rises from the cold waters of the North Sea, rolling inland to obscure the boundaries of fields and roads, creating an environment of profound isolation. In the early 20th century, this sense of solitude was even more pronounced, particularly in the scattered hamlets that dotted the landscape. Among these was the parish of Langenhoe, a small settlement located a few miles south of Colchester. The village itself was unassuming, primarily agricultural, but it possessed a focal point that would become the subject of intense scrutiny and unease for decades. Standing alone on a slight elevation overlooking the marshes was St. Andrew's Church, a structure of stone and flint that served not only as a place of worship, but, according to extensive contemporary accounts, as the center of a complex and disturbing series of unexplained phenomena. The events that transpired within and around this building were not fleeting rumors or folklore passed down through centuries of oral tradition, but were instead meticulously documented in the 20th century by a credible witness who found himself thrust into an environment that defied logical explanation. The central figure in this narrative is the Reverend Ernest Merriweather, a man of the cloth who assumed the incumbency of Langenhoe in 1937. Merriweather was, by all accounts, a rational and pragmatic individual, a man grounded in the theology and duties of the Church of England, yet possessed of an intellectual curiosity regarding the history of his new parish. When he arrived at Langenhoe, he found a church that already bore the scars of history. The building had been significantly damaged during the Great English Earthquake of 1884. And although repairs had been made, the structure retained an air of fragility and weathering. The rectory, where Merriweather resided, was situated a short distance from the church, but the isolation of the location meant that the two buildings stood as solitary sentinels against the vast emptiness of the marshes. It was not long after his arrival that the Reverend began to perceive that the silence of the landscape was deceptive. His initial experiences were subtle, easily dismissed by a mind inclined toward rationalism. He noted curious acoustic anomalies, sounds that seemed to lack a physical source. The heavy oak doors of the church, which required significant force to manipulate, would occasionally be found unlatched or standing ajar when he was certain he had secured them. On quiet afternoons, while tending to administrative tasks within the vestry, the sound of footsteps would drift up the nave, the distinct crunch of boots on stone. Yet, upon investigation, the church would be found entirely empty. As the weeks turned into months, the phenomena escalated from ambiguous noises to more distinct and unsettling occurrences. Merriweather began to keep a detailed journal of the events, recording dates, times, and descriptions of the incidents with a detached clinical precision. One of the earliest recurring manifestations involved the sensation of presence. The Reverend described the feeling of being watched, a palpable heaviness that would settle over the interior of the church, particularly near the altar and the vestry. This was not merely a psychological reaction to the loneliness of the setting, but a physical sensation that often accompanied a sudden drop in temperature. Witnesses who visited the church, including local parishioners and visiting clergy, corroborated these feelings, often describing an urge to leave the building or a sudden onset of inexplicable anxiety. The atmosphere within St. Andrew's was frequently described as thick or charged, as if the air itself held a static tension that preceded the auditory and visual phenomena. It was during the late autumn of 1937 that the activity began to manifest in more aggressive and undeniable ways. Merriweather reported that while conducting solitary prayers or preparing for Sunday services, he would hear the distinct sound of the latch on the main west door lifting and falling, followed by the heavy thud of the door striking the frame, yet the door remained bolted fast when he went to check. The auditory phenomena were not limited to simple knocks or footsteps. There were occasions recorded in the Reverend's journals where the sounds took on a more complex and intelligent character. He described incidents where he heard what sounded like a conversation taking place in the nave, the voices muffled and indistinct, rising and falling in cadence as if two or more people were engaged in an urgent discussion, When he would call out or step from the vestry to confront the intruders, the voices would cease instantly, leaving only the sound of the wind whistling through the cracks in the masonry. On other occasions, the sounds were musical in nature. Merriweather documented hearing the faint, mournful notes of an organ being played, despite the fact that the church organ was locked and covered. The notes were not random, but formed fragments of recognizable melodies, often described as archaic or liturgical in style, yet played with a hesitant, almost faltering touch. These auditory hallucinations, if they were such, were shared by others. Workmen hired to perform maintenance on the church grounds reported hearing the sound of a choir singing within the locked building. The voices described as female and ethereal, fading away as soon as the doors were opened. The winter of 1938 brought a new dimension to the haunting of Langenhoe, one that moved beyond the auditory and into the visual. Reverend Merriweather recorded his first sighting of an apparition during a routine inspection of the church interior. He described seeing a figure standing near the font, a woman dressed in clothing that appeared to date from the late Victorian or Edwardian era. The figure was not transparent or misty, as is often the case in ghost stories, but appeared solid and lifelike, only to vanish when approached. This figure, often referred to in later retellings as the Lady in the Gray Dress, was seen on multiple occasions, sometimes standing silently in the nave, other times moving purposefully towards the vestry before disappearing into the solid stone wall. The Reverend, initially skeptical of his own senses, began to research the history of the parish, seeking a connection between the apparition and the location. He uncovered local records suggesting a connection to the Waldegrave family, prominent landowners in the region during the previous centuries, though no definitive link could be established to the specific figure he observed. The ambiguity of the identity added to the unsettling nature of the sightings. The figure was simply there, a resident of the church who refused to acknowledge the passage of time or the presence of the living. The phenomena were not confined to the interior of the church. The narrow, winding road that led to Langenhoe was the site of numerous reported encounters. Drivers and cyclists passing the church at night would report seeing a figure standing by the roadside, staring out across the marshes. In some instances, witnesses described a woman who would step out into the road, forcing vehicles to brake sharply, only to find the road empty. One particularly disturbing account involved a local delivery driver who claimed to have seen a young woman standing at the church gate, her face obscured by a veil. When he slowed his vehicle to offer assistance, believing her to be stranded, she turned and walked through the closed iron gate, fading into the darkness of the graveyard. These roadside encounters created a reputation for the area, leading locals to avoid the route after dark. The isolation of the church, sitting atop its small hill, made it a landmark for these strange occurrences, a beacon of the unexplained in a landscape that was already desolate and foreboding. The integration of the exterior sightings with the interior phenomena suggested that whatever influence held sway at Langenhoe was not limited by the physical walls of the sanctuary. As the years progressed, the nature of the haunting seemed to evolve, becoming more interactive and, at times, more threatening. Reverend Merriweather documented incidents where physical objects were manipulated. Books in the vestry would be moved from their shelves and placed in stacks on the floor. Vases of flowers on the altar would be overturned or rearranged. In one startling entry, he described finding the heavy communion table shifted several inches from its position, a feat that would have required significant strength to accomplish. The most disturbing aspect of these physical manifestations was the invisible barrier phenomenon. On several occasions, the Reverend reported attempting to walk down the aisle of the church only to be stopped by an unseen force, a resistance in the air that prevented forward motion. He described it as walking into a wall of dense, pressurized air. This sensation was often accompanied by a feeling of intense cold and a distinct, localized odor. The smell was described variously as the scent of violets, a sweet, cloying perfume, or, in stark contrast, the heavy, metallic stench of decay. These olfactory hallucinations would appear suddenly and vanish just as quickly, leaving no trace of their source. The psychological toll on Reverend Merriweather was significant. Living in close proximity to the church, in the solitude of the rectory, meant that there was little respite from the atmosphere of the place. He began to sleep poorly, often waking to the sound of banging on the rectory doors or the ringing of the doorbell when no one was there. The boundary between the church and his home seemed to blur, the activity bleeding over into his domestic life. Despite this, he remained committed to his ministry, viewing the phenomena not as a reason to flee, but as a challenge to be understood. He invited colleagues and researchers to the church, hoping for corroboration or explanation. Those who spent time in the building often left with their own stories. A visiting clergyman reported being shoved violently from behind while kneeling in prayer, yet there was no one near him. Another witness, a woman from the village, claimed to have felt a hand stroke her hair while she sat in a pew, a touch she described as gentle but undeniably physical. These testimonies transformed the Langenho haunting from the subjective experience of one man into a collective mystery shared by the community. One of the most specific and chilling incidents recorded in the archives of this case involved a moment of physical embrace. Reverend Merriweather wrote of a summer evening when, while locking the church for the night, he felt a pair of arms wrap around him from behind. The sensation was distinct and unmistakable, the pressure of limbs against his torso, the feeling of a chin resting on his shoulder. He froze, paralyzed by the sheer impossibility of the event. The embrace lasted for several seconds before the pressure simply dissolved. There was no breath, no sound, only the tactile sensation of another human form pressing against him. When he spun around, the church was empty, the dust motes dancing in the fading light of the setting sun. This incident marked a turning point in the narrative, moving the phenomena from the realm of the observational to the deeply personal. It suggested a level of intimacy and awareness on the part of the entity or force that was profoundly disturbing. It was not merely a replay of past events or a residual haunting, it was an active interaction with the living. The culmination of the activity seemed to coincide with the changing of the seasons and the darkening of the days. In the late 1940s, the manifestations became almost daily occurrences. The phantom choir was heard more frequently, the voices swelling to a crescendo that could be heard from the rectory garden. The heavy oak doors would bang open and shut with violence, regardless of the weather conditions. The Reverend noted that the activities seemed tied to specific locations within the church, particularly the chancel and the vestry, as if these areas held a particular resonance. He began to conduct impromptu investigations, sitting in the dark of the church for hours, waiting and watching. It was during these vigils that he observed small lights, like orbs of blue fire, dancing near the altar. These lights would hover for moments before darting away or fading out. He also reported the sound of heavy breathing, ragged and labored, originating from the empty pulpit, as if an invisible orator were struggling for air. The local community's relationship with the church became increasingly strained. Attendance at services, never high given the small population, began to dwindle further as parishioners became reluctant to enter the building alone or remain there after dusk. The reputation of Langenho spread beyond the immediate vicinity, attracting the attention of psychical researchers from London and other parts of the country. Their reports, filed in various archives, align closely with Merriweather's own journals. They documented temperature fluctuations of up to 20 degrees within minutes, the malfunction of camera equipment, and the inexplicable draining of batteries. One researcher described witnessing a heavy hymn board detach itself from the wall and float gently to the floor, defying the laws of gravity. These external validations provided a measure of vindication for the Reverend, proving that the events were not the product of an isolated mind, but were objective occurrences observable by third parties. In the early 1950s, a particularly bizarre episode occurred involving the church bell. St. Andrew's possessed a single bell housed in a small turret. One afternoon, the bell began to toll rhythmically. The Reverend, knowing the church was locked and empty, rushed to the building. As he approached, the tolling continued, a steady, mournful sound echoing across the marshes. He unlocked the door and ran to the bell rope, expecting to find an intruder. He found the rope swinging wildly, propelled by an unseen hand. He grabbed the rope to stop it, feeling a distinct resistance, a tug-of-war with an invisible opponent. The force eventually yielded, and the bell fell silent. This incident was heard by workers in nearby fields, who later asked the Reverend why he had been tolling the bell at such an odd hour. The public nature of this event made it difficult to dismiss, serving as a stark reminder of the potency of the phenomena. Despite the intensity of the haunting, the true end of the Langenhoe mystery was brought about not by an exorcism or a resolution of the spirits, but by structural failure. The church, already weakened by the 1884 earthquake and the shifting clay soil of the marshes, began to deteriorate rapidly in the 1950s. Cracks appeared in the masonry, the roof began to leak, and the building was deemed unsafe. The decision was made to close the church and eventually demolish it. This process was drawn out, and during the period of abandonment, the stories of the haunting continued. Locals reported seeing lights flickering in the windows of the condemned building and hearing the sounds of singing drifting from the ruin. The Reverend Merriweather, who had moved on to another parish, maintained his account of the events until the end of his life, insisting that what he had experienced was genuine and inexplicable. The demolition of the church in the early 1960s removed the physical structure, but it did not erase the history of the site. The site where St. Andrew's once stood is now overgrown, a patch of rough ground marked only by a few tombstones and the outlines of the foundation. The rectory, too, is gone. The landscape has reclaimed the space, the marshes encroaching on the land where the congregation once gathered. Yet, the accounts of the Langenhoe haunting remain among the most detailed and consistent in the annals of British psychical research. They stand apart because of the credibility of the primary witness and the sheer variety of the phenomena reported. It was a haunting that engaged all the senses: the sight of the lady in gray, the sound of the phantom choir and the heavy footsteps, the smell of violets and decay, the touch of the invisible hand, and the physical resistance of the unseen wall. It was a total immersion in the unexplained, played out against the backdrop of one of England's most desolate landscapes. The narrative of Langenhoe is also a study in the interaction between environment and perception. The isolation of the Essex marshes, with their shifting fogs and endless horizons, undoubtedly contributed to the atmosphere of the haunting. The silence of the location acted as a canvas upon which the auditory phenomena were amplified. Every creak of the settling stone, every whisper of the wind became charged with significance. However, the specificity of the incidents, the intelligent responses, the manipulation of objects, the physical interactions suggest something more than environmental paranoia. The documentation provided by Reverend Merriweather offers a chronological progression of a haunting that seemed to possess a narrative of its own, even if that narrative was never fully deciphered. The entities, if such they were, seemed tied to the land and the stone, residual energies or active intelligences playing out a script that had no audience but the lonely priest. One of the most intriguing aspects of the case remains the lack of a definitive origin story for the phenomena. While the Waldegrave connection offered a potential historical hook, it never fully explained the range of activity. The phantom choir and the invisible wall do not fit neatly into the standard ghost story trope of a restless soul seeking justice. Instead, Langenhoe presented a kaleidoscope of high strangeness, a convergence of different types of paranormal activity in a single location. Some researchers have speculated that the location itself was a thin place, a point where the boundaries between realities were permeable, allowing for a bleed-through of sounds and images from the past or from elsewhere. The geographical features, the water, and the fault lines associated with the earthquake have all been cited as potential contributing factors to a geophysical battery theory, yet these remain speculations. The accounts of the naked woman apparition, a detail often suppressed in more sanitized versions of the story, add another layer of complexity. Reports exist of a figure seen walking through the closed doors of the church, described as a naked female form, pale and unearthly. This figure was distinct from the lady in gray and seemed to represent a more primal or elemental force. Such sightings were rare but deeply traumatizing for the witnesses, reinforcing the idea that the church was a container for multiple, distinct phenomena. The diversity of the manifestations is what makes the Langenho case so difficult to categorize. It was not a simple haunting, it was a siege of the unexplained. In the years following the demolition, the site became a place of interest for a new generation of researchers. Electronic voice phenomena, EVP, sessions conducted on the vacant land have allegedly captured voices speaking in archaic dialects, and photographs taken at the site often show anomalies such as orbs or unexplained mists. These modern investigations attempt to bridge the gap between the historical records of Reverend Merriweather and the present day, suggesting that the removal of the building did not necessarily remove the presence. The land retains a reputation, a lingering echo of the events that drove a man of faith to question the nature of reality. The locals who still remember the church speak of it with a mixture of reverence and fear, a testament to the impact the haunting had on the collective psyche of the village. The mystery of the locked doors remains one of the most enduring images of the Langenho case. The image of a priest standing alone in a cold stone church, watching the heavy iron latch lift of its own accord, captures the essence of the human encounter with the paranormal. It is a moment of confrontation with the impossible, a breach of the natural order that demands attention. Merriweather's journals describe his initial attempts to find rational explanations, drafts, subsidence, pranksters, and the slow, inexorable dismantling of those explanations until only the impossible remained. It is this journey from skepticism to acceptance that gives the narrative its power. He did not set out to find ghosts, they found him. Is less than has hone. Zero hash is greater than. Another significant element was the behavior of animals in the vicinity of the church. It was reported that dogs would refuse to enter the churchyard, bracing their legs and whining in distress if forced near the gate. Birds were rarely seen perching on the roof of the church, even when the surrounding trees were full of life. This reaction from the natural world is a common trope in folklore, but in the context of the detailed reports from Langenho, it serves as another data point corroborating the presence of an anomaly. The environment itself seemed to reject the building, or perhaps the building rejected the environment. The pervasive coldness described by witnesses, a chill that penetrated heavy coats and seemed to emanate from the floor, further supports the idea of an energy drain or a thermodynamic anomaly associated with the manifestations. The final days of St. Andrews were marked by a sense of melancholy. As the decision to demolish became final, the activity reportedly spiked, as if the entities were aware of the impending destruction. The sounds of the choir became louder, heard by people walking on the road well away from the church. The lights seen in the windows were brighter, pulsing with a rhythm that some witnesses described as like a heartbeat. When the wrecking crews finally arrived, they too reported equipment malfunctions and a general sense of unease, though the work proceeded. When the walls were finally brought down, the silence that returned to the hill was absolute. The wind swept over the rubble, and the marshes reclaimed the view. Today, the story of Langenho is a quiet one, overshadowed by more famous and sensationalized hauntings. It does not have a horror movie franchise or a stream of tourists. It exists in the dusty pages of psychical research journals and the memories of the few who still recall the solitary church on the hill. But for those who delve into the records, it remains a premier example of a multifaceted haunting, a case where a rational observer was forced to document the irrational day after day, year after year. The legacy of Reverend Merriweather is his testimony, a sober and unflinching account of living with the unknown. The desolation of the marshes holds its secrets still, buried beneath the earth where the foundations of St. Andrews once lay, a reminder that some places in the world are simply different, tuned to a frequency that the living can hear but never fully understand. The surviving records indicate that Merriweather never retracted his claims. In interviews conducted years later, he spoke of his time at Langenhoe not with fear, but with a profound sense of wonder mixed with resignation. He described the invisible wall as his most compelling proof, a physical interaction with a force that had no mass but possessed infinite strength. He speculated on the nature of the Lady in Grey, wondering if she was a trapped memory or a conscious entity. These musings offer no final answers, only more questions. The case stands as a monolith of the unexplained, a complex weave of history, geography, and high strangeness that refuses to be unraveled. The church is gone, but the echo remains, a whisper in the Essex wind that speaks of open doors, phantom choirs, and the solitude of a priest watching the darkness, waiting for it to blink. The search team heard children laughing where no children were reported missing. The first radio note came in after dusk, when a volunteer said he heard children laughing deep in timber. Investigators later wrote that no children were reported missing that night, and records conflict on who logged it. The comment stayed in dispatch logs, reportedly copied into a county file from 2009. In late September 2009, Custer County deputies in central Idaho received a welfare call tied to an overdue solo hunter. The hunter was Daniel Rourke, 34, an HVAC technician from Boise who planned a weekend hunt near Stanley. State records show his truck was found at a forest pullout outside town with fuel and gear still inside. Archived notes described clear weather, fresh tire tracks, and no obvious sign of injury. Search operations formed by midday, with Sheriff's Office staff coordinating with Forest Service personnel and local volunteers. One team leader was Marla Jensen, 41, a paramedic from Chalice, assigned to a grid on a ridge above the Salmon River. Another was Evan Pike, 29, a seasonal ranger trainee, tasked with tracking radio traffic and mapping sweep lines. Dispatch logs show calm conditions, with wind rising after 6 p.m. and temperatures dropping quickly. Reportedly, the first sweep followed Daniel's likely route toward a saddle that hunters used to reach higher basins. County file notes list footprints that started strong, then broke across loose scree and vanished near a patch of willows. Some locals claim the ground there held water under thin grass, which could blur prints in minutes. Investigators never confirmed that detail, and state records do not describe standing water at the site. A second team checked game trails nearby, finding only older boot marks mixed with elk sign. By the second evening, dispatch logs show a request for additional radios and spare batteries due to weak coverage in the basin. Marla's team worked a timbered slope where sound carried oddly, reportedly echoing from rock bands. County notes say the group paused several times to listen for calls, whistles, or knocks. At 7:20 p.m., a volunteer called in that he heard children laughing, short bursts, then silence. The report states no child search was active and no family had reported a missing juvenile in the region. In later interviews, some volunteers described the sound as distant and brief, like play on a schoolyard. Others said it resembled a radio artifact, a kind of bleed from another frequency, though that remained unproven. Investigators wrote that laughter can be misheard in wind, especially when branches rub and ravens chatter. Still, dispatch logs show the call was taken seriously, with a supervisor asking for the team's exact location. They marked the point on a topographic map, then redirected a nearby unit to check a drainage below. The redirected unit included Evan Pike, who was assigned to help with navigation and documentation. Reportedly, he noted the time, the bearing, and the terrain features in a small field notebook. Archive notes indicate he wrote that the drainage narrowed into a steep gully with deadfall and slick stones. The team searched for fresh prints, finding only scattered boot scuffs that could not be matched to Daniel's tread. State records later stated that no human voice was heard, only the reported laughter sound. Around midnight, dispatch logs show a brief mention of a second odd audio report, this time described as a single high-pitched squeal. The deputy on duty asked whether it could be a fox, and the caller said he did not know. County file from 2009 includes that exchange, reportedly photocopied from the radio room binder. Investigators never confirmed whether wildlife calls could account for the first laughter report. Some locals claimed cougars can produce sounds that resemble human cries, yet the records do not settle that question. On day 3, search managers expanded the grid and added a dog team from the region. State records indicate one dog showed interest near the initial footprint loss area, then stopped working after moving into willows. Handlers reportedly cited scent pooling and shifting wind, which made tracking unreliable. County notes also mention heavy human traffic along the search corridor, which can mask a single subject trail. The team then focused on likely injury sites, including creek crossings and cliff edges. A separate report in archived notes mentions a small campfire ring found on a bench above the river. Investigators wrote that the ring appeared older, with ash that looked damp and compacted. Some locals claimed it belonged to a fishing party from earlier in the month, though investigators never confirmed. No food wrappers were recovered, and no personal items linked to Daniel were found nearby. Dispatch logs show no request for evidence collection that afternoon, suggesting the site was treated as incidental. By day 4, the case file shows growing concern about Daniel's medical history, which was reportedly limited in the initial intake. A family contact stated he had mild asthma and he carried an inhaler, though that item was not listed among gear found in the truck. Records conflict on whether the inhaler was missing from the vehicle or simply not logged at first. The sheriff's office requested a cell phone ping, but state records note the area had poor service and limited tower reach. Investigators reported no usable location data returned from the request. The laughter report kept resurfacing in briefings, reportedly because it drew teams toward an area otherwise considered low probability. Search planners asked volunteers to avoid rumor sharing, according to archived notes from a nightly meeting. Still, some locals claimed the sound came from the old mining cut above the gully, a place with vertical walls. Others suggested it could have been children at a nearby campsite, though no campsite was documented in that drainage. Investigators never confirmed any youth group permit for that week, and state records show no missing child report in adjacent counties. On day 5, a Forest Service officer reported a faint odor near a tangle of deadfall, though it was described as intermittent. Dog teams worked the area again, with one dog alerting briefly, then losing interest. County notes describe a sudden shift in wind direction around 2 p.m., which complicated interpretation. Searchers cleared the deadfall with poles, finding animal bones and a torn piece of tarp that appeared weathered. Investigators never confirmed whether the tarp was connected to the case, and it was not listed in evidence returns. That evening, dispatch logs show a medical call for a volunteer who slipped and injured an ankle, requiring extraction by ATV. The incident reduced manpower in the gully sector, and leaders reportedly postponed a deeper push until morning. Evan Pike's notes, later summarized in the county file from 2009, mention radio chatter about the laughter again. He reportedly wrote that the timing matched a gap in traffic when one repeater was down. Investigators never confirmed a technical failure that would produce laughter like audio, and maintenance logs were not attached in the case file. On day 6, teams conducted a structured sound sweep, using whistles at fixed intervals and listening windows. Archived notes describe the valley as unusually quiet, with little bird activity during the first hour. No responsive calls were heard, and no human movement was observed in open slides. Some locals claimed that a hidden cabin existed upriver, used seasonally by workers, though investigators never confirmed. State records show no cabin permit listed in that drainage, and aerial review did not identify a roofline. With no clear trail, investigators turned to reconstructing Daniel's known habits and likely choices. Family statements said he hunted alone often, preferred ridges over creek bottoms, and avoided thick brush. His phone showed a saved map of the Stanley area, but the last confirmed use time did not match the weekend. Records conflict on whether his phone was left at home or carried, since no device was recovered. Dispatch logs show repeated requests to check trailheads for any witness who saw him after arrival. A witness did come forward, reportedly a store clerk in Stanley who remembered a man buying jerky and a lighter. The clerk could not identify him with certainty, and the receipt was not preserved in the file. Another report mentions a hiker who saw a lone male near a river bend, though the date was unclear. Investigators wrote that memory errors were common due to multiple hunting parties in the region. County notes list the witness statements, but they do not resolve whether Daniel ever reached the saddle. In October, the organized search scaled down, shifting to periodic checks and hunter awareness. State records indicate the sheriff's office kept the case open, listing it as a missing adult with unknown risk factors. The laughter report remained in the narrative summary, reportedly because it was unusual and repeated in volunteer interviews. Investigators cautioned that human perception is unreliable in wind and terrain, according to archived notes. Still, the file also states that multiple listeners claimed they heard the same sound within a short window. In 2011, a new entry appears in the county file, describing a boot found during spring runoff near a logjam. The boot was not conclusively matched to Daniel's known brand, and records conflict on whether the size aligned. No DNA result is listed, and investigators wrote that the item was degraded and exposed. A second item was described as a belt fragment, though no photo inventory appears in state records. Investigators never confirmed the recovery site coordinates in public summaries, and no further remains were reported. Years later, in 2019, a records request reportedly produced a partial dispatch transcript that again highlighted the laughter call. The transcript includes the supervisor's response, asking for calm and a precise bearing, then instructing a containment check. County file from 2009 in archived copies lists the same time and sector name, though spelling differs. Investigators never confirmed whether that discrepancy came from transcription or from multiple logbooks. Some locals claimed the laughter story was exaggerated over time. Yet the original log entries still exist in records summaries. As of the last public update, Daniel Rourke remained missing, with no confirmed sighting after his truck was located near Stanley. The case file shows routine explanations, including misnavigation, injury, and exposure, without a single supported conclusion. Dispatch logs, state records, and archive notes preserve the laughter report as an unresolved detail, not a finding. Investigators never confirmed any missing children in the area that week, and county records conflict on what caused the sound. The search teams closed their final grid without evidence that could settle the question of where Daniel went next. The phantom vehicles of Route 491. There is a stretch of asphalt that bleeds through the Four Corners region of the American Southwest, a desolate ribbon cutting across the Navajo Nation. It is a place of striking, barren beauty by day, characterized by jagged red rock formations and oceans of pale sagebrush. But when the sun drops below the horizon, the landscape changes. The temperature plummets, shadows stretch into unnatural shapes, and the isolation becomes absolute. This is Route 491. For nearly 8 decades, however, it carried a different designation, one that seemed to infect the very earth beneath the pavement. It was known as Route 666, the Devil's Highway. Commissioned in 1926 as the 6th spur of the legendary Route 66, the highway was burdened with a numeric association that immediately cast a shadow over its creation. For years, engineers and locals alike brushed off the designation as a mere administrative coincidence, but the road quickly earned a reputation soaked in blood and unexplained terror. The accident statistics on that endless, straight stretch of desert highway were consistently impossibly high. Fatalities occurred on clear days with dry roads and perfect visibility. Cars were found crushed along the shoulder with no evidence of another vehicle involved, no tire marks indicating a sudden swerve, and no logical explanation for the trauma inflicted upon the twisted metal. In May of 2003, state officials finally bowed to public pressure and indigenous leaders who argued the number was a cursed relic. The highway signs were replaced, Route 666 became Route 491. The politicians and highway patrol supervisors hoped that scrubbing the mark of the beast from the map would purge the highway of its dark legacy. They believed new metal signs would bring safety. But the land does not care about human administration. The geography remained unchanged, and the road continued to collect its toll in the dead of night. The local folklore of the Navajo has always warned against lingering in this territory after dark. There are hushed stories of skinwalkers, dark entities capable of taking animal form, keeping pace with vehicles traveling at 70 miles per hour. There are accounts of pale, featureless faces pressing against passenger windows in the middle of a desolate run. But among those who drive heavy freight for a living, there is a different, more mechanical terror. It is the legend of the phantom rigs, massive black trucks that hunt on the endless straightaways, leaving no trace but the wreckage of those they force off the road. To understand the dread, one must understand the environment. Picture a lone commercial driver hauling a heavy payload through the vast emptiness near the border of Utah and Colorado. The time is exactly 3 a.m. This is the hour when the human body begs for sleep, when the mind begins to play tricks, and when the veil between reality and nightmares wears dangerously thin. The driver sits high in the cab of an 18-wheeler, surrounded by the monotonous hum of diesel power and the relentless drone of heavy tires on cold asphalt. Beyond the reach of the headlights, the world ceases to exist. There are no streetlights, there are no distant farmhouses glowing in the dark. There is only the yellow center line flashing past, a hypnotic metronome marking the passage of time through a void. The cabin temperature is warm, yet a deep chill seems to radiate from the glass of the windshield. The driver reaches for the radio dial, seeking the comfort of a late-night broadcast or the chatter of another trucker on the Citizens Band. The radio offers nothing. The steady signal of a distant country music station abruptly warps, the music bending out of tune before dissolving entirely. It is replaced by a thick, heavy hiss of static. The driver turns the dial, scanning through the frequencies. Every channel yields the same dense, aggressive white noise. Even the emergency channel is dead. The electronic isolation mirrors the physical isolation. The truck is a lone island of steel moving through a sea of black sand and stone. It is then that the driver checks the side mirror. Far in the distance, swallowed by the immense dark of the highway, twin points of light appear. They are headlights, burning with an intense, unnatural halogen glare. At first, they are a minor detail, just another traveler sharing the lonely road. But within a matter of seconds, the lights grow significantly larger. The distance is closing at a rate that defies the physics of a heavy vehicle. The driver checks the speedometer. The 18-wheeler is pushing 75 miles per hour. Yet, the lights in the mirror are approaching as if the driver's rig is parked on the shoulder. The driver grips the steering wheel tighter, expecting the violent rush of wind and the deafening roar of a modified engine as the reckless vehicle overtakes. A massive rig moving at that speed displaces a massive amount of air. It commands a physical presence, but as the blinding headlights fill the entirety of the side mirrors, turning the interior of the cab a stark, clinical white, there is no sound. The silence is the first true indicator of the nightmare. The driver's own diesel engine continues to hum, but from the approaching vehicle there is absolute quiet, no grinding of heavy gears. No roar of a supercharged engine, no heavy tires screaming against the asphalt. The massive shape pulls out from behind, gliding into the opposing lane to pass. The driver glances out the driver's side window, preparing to curse the reckless operator. Instead, the words die in the throat. The vehicle pulling alongside is another tractor-trailer, but it is deeply wrong. It is a colossal machine painted in a matte black so absolute that it seems to absorb the faint ambient light of the moon. There is no chrome trim, there are no reflective safety strips, there is no company logo painted on the side of the trailer. It is a silhouette of pure, heavy darkness given physical form, moving silently at an impossible speed. The phantom truck aligns itself perfectly with the driver's rig. They are moving parallel, hurtling through the desert night side by side. The driver looks across the narrow gap between the two massive machines, peering up into the cab of the black truck. The interior of the Phantom rig is not lit by dashboard dials or a soft overhead light. It is pitch black. Yet, the driver's eyes adjust just enough to perceive the horrifying truth. The heavy leather seat is empty. There is no one behind the wheel. The massive steering column remains perfectly still, yet the truck maintains a flawless trajectory. There is no driver, no human element controlling this tons of hurtling steel. It is an empty vessel, operating with a malicious, independent will. Before the driver can fully process the impossible sight, the black truck begins to drift. It does not swerve violently, it moves with a slow, deliberate, and crushing intent. The Phantom rig crosses the yellow center line, invading the driver's lane. The sheer mass of the black truck forces the driver to adjust the steering wheel, edging the 18-wheeler toward the right. The right side tires hit the rumble strip. The sudden, violent vibration shakes the cab, a desperate mechanical warning. The asphalt here is narrow. Beyond the thin shoulder lies a steep, crumbling embankment leading down into the dark, jagged ravines that line this section of Route 491. The Phantom truck continues its silent push. It does not scrape against the driver's vehicle. There is no spark of colliding metal, only an oppressive, magnetic pressure forcing the living driver further out of the lane. The driver slams on the air brakes. The massive tires lock, screaming in protest as the heavy rig fights to shed speed. Plumes of acrid blue smoke erupt from the wheel wells. The truck bucks and shudders, the trailer threatening to jackknife as the rear wheels slide perilously close to the edge of the abyss. The world becomes a chaotic blur of vibration, the smell of burning rubber, and the terrifying pull of gravity toward the unseen canyon floor. As the driver's rig finally grinds to a violent halt, the front right tire resting mere inches from a fatal drop, the driver looks up. The black truck has not slowed down. It has not merged back into the lane, it simply continues its forward trajectory, the blinding red glow of its taillights fading into the distance. Then, in the blink of an eye, the red lights extinguish. The massive black shape dissolves into the desert night. There is no sound of an engine fading into the distance. There is no dust trail. The Phantom vehicle simply ceases to be, leaving behind nothing but the cold, vast emptiness of the highway. The driver sits trembling in the frozen cab, hands fused to the steering wheel, chest heaving with shallow breaths. The radio crackles to life, the static abruptly replaced by the clear, sharp twang of a guitar from a distant station. The natural world has returned. But as the driver looks down past the hood of the truck into the yawning blackness of the ravine, a sickening realization takes hold. Down in the depths of those canyons, hidden by the shadows and the jagged rocks, lie the rusted, twisted frames of vehicles that never made it home. They belong to the drivers who did not wake up in time, the ones who did not hit the brakes fast enough when the empty black rigs silently pushed them over the edge. Route 491 may have a new sign, but the pavement remains stained with the past, and the isolated night still belongs to the things that hunt on the Devil's Highway. He answered a distress call in the forest. No one was there. The call came in just after dusk, and Ranger Caleb Harlan answered because his radio was closest to the ridgeline. He'd worked Chelan County forests for 11 years, and routine welfare checks rarely turned strange. Dispatch logs reportedly captured a panicked male voice, then a sudden drop into open-air static. By the time Caleb reached the marked turnout, the forest was quiet enough to hear his engine ticking. He keyed the mic again, and nobody answered, not even to curse or breathe. Caleb was 34, a field ranger assigned to the Okanogan-Wenatchee National Forest area, and he was finishing a patrol near Kashmir. His shift notes later stated he expected a stranded hiker near the Icicle Creek corridor based on the caller's broken landmarks. The dispatcher, Mara Venson, was 29 and 6 months into county communications, and she recorded the call as a possible injury. State records show the weather was mild for early September, with no lightning activity flagged that evening. Reportedly, the caller said he could see a service road and a reflective sign. Then he mentioned voices without clarification. Investigators never confirmed whether that word was accurately transcribed because the audio quality was inconsistent. County file from 2009 included older complaints about bad reception in that drainage, and archived notes warned responders to confirm coordinates twice. At 7:14 p.m., Caleb acknowledged the assignment and drove toward a turnout used by anglers and late summer campers. Dispatch logs reportedly show Mara requesting a callback number, but the caller did not provide one. The caller's signal did ping a tower near Leavenworth, though records conflict on the precision of that location. Caleb parked, scanned with a handheld light, and called out using the standard lost person script. He noted fresh tire tracks on the gravel shoulder, yet no vehicle was visible in either direction. Some locals claimed later that illegal dumping crews used that road at night, though investigators never confirmed consistent activity there. Caleb walked the verge, found crushed ferns, and identified one partial boot print that could not be matched. Mara tried to re-establish contact every 3 minutes, and the CAD timeline shows 6 attempted returns with no successful ring. A state records request later indicated the original call routed through a carrier known for handoff drops in steep terrain. Caleb reported hearing a single shout at 7:29 p.m. faint and quickly swallowed by tree cover. He moved upslope, checking for reflective tape and disturbed brush while maintaining radio check-ins. His body camera captured a steady path, then a sudden stop as he listened, shoulders slightly raised. He called again, and only his own voice came back through the understory. The forest floor showed seasonal litter, and nothing suggested a dragged body or a sudden struggle. At 7:41 p.m., Mara upgraded the call to a priority welfare check and notified Sergeant Tom Ibarra from County Search and Rescue. Tom was 46, a volunteer coordinator with a day job in construction management, and he lived near Wenatchee. The decision was later debated because there was no confirmed patient, only an interrupted distress report. Dispatch logs reportedly included Mara's note that the caller sounded young, possibly late teens or early 20s. Some locals claimed it was a seasonal worker from a nearby orchard crew, though the sheriff's office never confirmed identity. Caleb stayed on scene, marking his route with GPS breadcrumbs and photographing the turnout signage. Archived notes show that this corridor had produced multiple voice-only calls in 2011 and 2013. Most later attributed to accidental pocket dials. Records conflict on whether those earlier incidents used the same tower sector. Tom arrived with 2 volunteers at 8:18 p.m., carrying a medical pack and a portable repeater intended to stabilize radio coverage. They established a hasty search pattern along the service road, then split into 2-person teams for safety. Caleb briefed them on the shout he believed he heard, careful to phrase it as uncertain and unconfirmed. The team found one disposable water bottle near a stump, though no fingerprints were recoverable due to moisture. A canine unit was requested, but it was delayed because the on-call handler was responding to a separate call in Douglas County. State records show the moon was near half, and cloud cover varied by elevation, limiting visibility under canopy. Caleb's notes mentioned an odor of gasoline, though investigators never confirmed a source. Between 8:30 p.m. and 10:05 p.m., the team expanded their grid and used periodic whistle blasts to prompt a response. Dispatch logs reportedly recorded no further incoming distress calls from that tower sector during those hours. Mara continued to monitor, and she noted a brief carrier bounce that suggested the phone moved, then disappeared again. That detail later became contested because the carrier's report did not list movement, only new registration attempts. Caleb located a narrow footpath branching off toward a creek, and he found a small scrape on a cedar trunk at waist height. Some locals claim the scrape looked like a tool mark from trail work, though it did not match the team's equipment. The creek edge showed no fresh slide marks, and the water level was low enough to expose rocks. They called the search at 10:22 p.m., documenting hazards and planning a daylight continuation. The next morning, county deputies joined, and a formal incident number was assigned in the sheriff's system. Caleb returned with a different partner, following protocol that discouraged solo contact after ambiguous calls. The daylight search produced more detail, and it also erased some nighttime certainty from everyone's memory. Tire tracks from the turnout had blended with new traffic, making it harder to isolate a single vehicle's pattern. Investigators photographed the boot print again, but the soil had dried and collapsed around the edges. A nearby campsite showed evidence of recent use, yet the campers were already gone and left no identifying information. State records show no missing person report filed in Chelan County within 72 hours that matched the caller description. Records conflict because neighboring counties reported 2 overdue hikers, though both later checked in safely. A records clerk later pulled archived notes on similar calls, including a county file from 2009 about a false distress report near a different ridge. That older file described a caller who gave landmarks that existed, yet responders found nothing and no subsequent missing person case. Investigators compared the language, but there was no definitive overlap beyond common terrain references. Mara, interviewed weeks later, reportedly insisted the caller sounded genuinely afraid, and she said the breathing pattern was uneven. The audio clip, preserved in the county system, was too degraded for voice identification, and the carrier could not provide a subscriber name due to legal limits. Some locals claimed the distress call was a prank tied to a seasonal party weekend, yet no one admitted involvement. Caleb's statement remained narrow, focused on what he saw and what he could not verify. Caleb's supervisors reviewed his actions against policy, and the review found no procedural violations in his response. The only critique involved the initial coordinate confidence, because the call lacked a precise location and the area had known reception gaps. Dispatch logs reportedly show Mara reading back the nearest road name and the caller giving a short confirmation before the line dropped. Investigators never confirmed whether that confirmation was meaningful or simply a habitual yes under stress. Search and rescue mapped the probable call origin using tower sector data, producing an oval that covered multiple drainages and 2 minor roads. The oval included private parcels used for timber staging, which limited access without permission. County deputies sought consent from landowners, and most cooperated, though one parcel could not be searched until 3 days later. That delay fueled rumors in Leavenworth, especially among people who followed missing cases online. When the parcel was finally searched, the team found nothing that would anchor the call to a person on the ground. No clothing, no blood, no abandoned vehicle, and no phone were recovered despite line sweeps and metal detection near pullouts. A K-9 team ran a scent article strategy using the water bottle, but the bottle's chain of custody was weak and results were inconclusive. Records conflict on whether the dog showed interest near the creek or simply followed general human traffic corridors. The sheriff's report noted that the incident remained unfounded, meaning unverified rather than disproven. Mara transferred to day shift later that year, reportedly because night calls left her anxious and exhausted. Caleb requested a different patrol zone for a month, and his request was granted without comment in the paperwork. Some locals claimed he avoided that turnout afterward, though coworkers said he still worked the area regularly. In 2019, the case never became a named disappearance because no identity was attached, only a voice and a broken set of directions. That absence shaped the file, turning it into a documentation exercise instead of an investigation with interviews and timelines. Archived notes show the county kept the audio snippet for training, emphasizing how incomplete information can still demand a full response. Caleb's final entry on the incident was a single line stating the distress call could not be correlated with any known person or event. Investigators never confirmed whether the caller walked away safely, lost signal, or never existed beyond a misrouted transmission. Records conflict, and the forest offers no closing statement, only weathered ground that resets after every night. Reportedly, hikers still mention odd radio dead zones along Icicle Creek, and rangers still stop at turnouts when the wrong kind of silence arrives. The Siege of Black Forest. The region known as Black Forest, located just northeast of Colorado Springs, Colorado, presents a geography that is both imposing and distinct. It is an area defined by its density, characterized by a thick concentration of ponderosa pines that rise from the high desert floor, creating a natural canopy that filters sunlight and significantly dampens sound. The elevation sits at roughly 7,500 feet, where the air is thin and the weather patterns are volatile, often shifting from intense solar heat to sudden, violent thunderstorms. In the early 1990s, this location was sought after for its isolation and its rugged, natural beauty, drawing individuals who wished to distance themselves from the encroaching suburban expansion of the nearby metropolitan areas. It was here, in 1991, that a particular log structure became the focal point of one of the most chemically and electronically complex paranormal accounts in American history. The residence, a sprawling log home situated on nearly 5 acres of land, was purchased by a family seeking a quiet, rural existence. The events that followed, however, would be documented not only by the residents, but by local law enforcement, independent investigators, and media personnel, leaving a record of disturbance that remains difficult to categorize. The family, consisting of a husband, a wife, and their 2 sons, acquired the property with the intention of establishing a permanent homestead. The husband was a pragmatic individual employed in the construction and landscaping industry, a background that gave him a thorough understanding of structural integrity, electrical wiring, and the settling noises inherent to wooden buildings. The house itself was relatively new, constructed of heavy timber, and situated at the end of a long, unpaved driveway that reinforced the sense of seclusion. For the first year of their residency, the location delivered exactly what had been promised: quiet nights, expansive views of the dark timberline, and a sense of retreat. The environment was peaceful, with the only notable sounds being the wind moving through the pine needles and the occasional call of local wildlife. There were no rumors of previous tragedies, no local folklore regarding the specific plot of land, and no history of violent crime associated with the address. The disturbances began abruptly, without the gradual buildup common in many accounts of residential hauntings. The onset was marked not by subtle whispers or cold drafts, but by a series of loud, concussive noises that mimicked the sound of structural failure. In the summer, following their first year in the home, the family was startled awake by a sound described as a heavy object crashing onto the floor of the living room. The volume and vibration were sufficient to shake the walls, leading the husband to believe that a piece of furniture or perhaps a heavy beam had fallen. Upon immediate investigation, the house was found to be in perfect order. Nothing had been displaced. The doors were locked, the windows were intact, and there was no evidence of intrusion or structural collapse. This phenomenon repeated itself on subsequent nights, often occurring between the hours of midnight and 3 in the morning. The sounds varied in character. Some resembled the dropping of telephone books, while others sounded like heavy boots walking across the roof or the wooden deck that wrapped around the exterior. As the weeks progressed, the auditory phenomena escalated into olfactory and visual disturbances. The family began to report sudden, overwhelming odors that would manifest in specific areas of the house before dissipating as quickly as they had arrived. These smells were not the musty odors of decay often reported in folklore, but were distinctly chemical in nature. Witnesses described the scent of burning sulfur, strong perfume, and acrid electrical discharge, similar to the smell of ozone following a lightning strike. These odors were often accompanied by a precipitous drop in temperature localized to small pockets of air within the hallways or the master bedroom. The husband, suspecting a ventilation issue or a gas leak, inspected the property's mechanical systems but found no defects. The furnace, the sewage lines, and the electrical grid were all functioning within normal parameters. The situation deteriorated significantly when the disturbances began to interact with the home's electrical systems. Lights would flicker rhythmically, appliances would turn on and off without human intervention, and the television would cycle through channels or increase in volume independently. Fearing that someone was tampering with the power supply or playing a malicious prank, the family installed a sophisticated security system. This system, which included motion detectors and cameras, only served to deepen the mystery. The alarms would trigger repeatedly, often indicating movement in the living room or the upstairs hallway. When the police or the family responded, the areas were empty. The motion logs indicated that sensors were being tripped in a sequence that suggested a physical presence moving through the house, yet the optical sensors and the human eye saw nothing. It was during this period of escalation that the El Paso County Sheriff's Department became involved. Unlike many cases where law enforcement dismisses such complaints as civil matters or mental instability, the deputies who responded to the Black Forest property found themselves witnessing events they could not explain. Official police reports from this time frame document the officers' experiences within the home. On several occasions, deputies present at the scene heard the distinct sound of footsteps on the upper floors while the entire family was accounted for in the living room. During one specific site visit, officers reported hearing what sounded like a chaotic orchestra of banging noises and heavy thuds originating from the roof. When they rushed outside to shine spotlights on the shingles, the noise ceased instantly and the roof was empty. There were no footprints in the dust, no animals, and no intruders hiding in the tree line. The visual phenomena reported by the family and corroborated by visitors shifted from shadows to light. Strange, glowing orbs and streaks of light began to appear both inside the residence and in the dense forest surrounding the property. These were not vague peripheral glimpses, they were sustained manifestations. The husband described seeing balls of light floating down the hallway, navigating corners with intelligent intent. Outside, in the pitch-black darkness of the forest, the family would observe beams of light that appeared to be searching the ground, similar to flashlights or laser sights, yet there was no source. These lights would sometimes hover stationary among the pines before darting away at impossible speeds. The activity seemed to suggest surveillance, creating a paranoid atmosphere where the residents felt they were being watched by an unseen intelligence that utilized the cover of the dense woods. One of the most disturbing aspects of the Black Forest case was the physical manipulation of the environment. The family reported that objects would vanish from secure locations and reappear in inexplicable places. Utensils, tools, and personal effects were found balanced precariously on door frames or arranged in geometric patterns on the floor. In one instance, the husband reported feeling a physical shove while standing on the stairs, a sensation of force that nearly caused him to lose his balance. The psychological toll on the family was severe. The children were terrified to sleep in their rooms, often congregating in the parents' bedroom for safety. The lack of sleep, combined with the constant state of hypervigilance, began to fray their nerves. The husband, determined to protect his property, began patrolling the grounds at night, armed and searching for a human perpetrator, but he never found one. As the activity continued, the family sought assistance from outside experts, including a local television crew and paranormal researchers. The introduction of recording equipment yielded compelling but ambiguous evidence. Photographs taken inside the house revealed unexplained anomalies, streaks of light that resembled lightning bolts, shadowy masses blocking out background details, and in some cases, faces appearing in the reflection of windows or the grain of the wood. One particular image, which became a focal point of the investigation, appeared to show a translucent, humanoid form sitting in one of the dining chairs. Audio recordings captured in the dead of night revealed sounds that resembled mechanical grinding, whispers that were too faint to decipher, and loud, rhythmic banging that had no acoustic source in the room. The high strangeness of the case peaked when the phenomena began to exhibit characteristics that blurred the line between a traditional haunting and something more technological. The family reported that on certain nights, the house felt as if it were charged with static electricity. Hair would stand on end, and touching metal surfaces would result in painful shocks. The chemical smells became more pungent, sometimes causing nausea or burning eyes. There were reports of a humming sound, a low-frequency vibration that could be felt in the teeth and bones emanating from beneath the foundation of the house. This led to wild speculation in the local community about underground military bases or secret government testing, given the proximity to defense installations in Colorado Springs. However, no evidence was ever found to support the theory of man-made technology causing the disturbances. The phenomena remained localized strictly to the log home and the immediate acreage. The interactions with the entities, or whatever forces were present, seemed to become more aggressive over time. The husband recounted an incident where he was working in the garage and felt a sudden, intense heat on his back, followed by the sensation of claws raking across his skin. Upon inspection, red welts were visible, though the skin was not broken. This physical attack marked a turning point. The entity was no longer just a noise or a light. It had demonstrated the capability to inflict pain. The family's resolve to stay and fight for their dream home began to crumble. The fear was no longer about ghosts, it was a primal fear for their physical safety and sanity. The isolation of the Black Forest, once a selling point, had become a trap. The darkness of the woods felt heavy and oppressive, concealing something that refused to reveal its true nature. Investigators who spent time in the house often left with more questions than answers. Some experienced equipment malfunctions, with fresh batteries draining in minutes and cameras jamming inexplicably. Others reported the sensation of being watched, a heavy feeling of dread that would induce panic attacks in otherwise seasoned researchers. One researcher described the house as having a digestive quality, as if the structure itself was feeding on the anxiety of its occupants. The sheer volume of activity was staggering. Logs kept by the family indicated that disturbances were occurring almost nightly, ranging from the trivial, such as the sound of a closing door, to the terrifying, such as the sight of a shadow figure standing at the foot of the bed. In an effort to understand what was happening, the history of the land was scrutinized more closely. While there were no recorded massacres, the Black Forest area had a long history of indigenous presence and later intense logging and ranching. Some speculated that the land itself held a residual energy, a theory supported by the window area hypothesis, which suggests certain geographical locations act as portals for various types of unexplained phenomena. However, no specific historical trigger could be found. The house was not built on a known cemetery, nor was it the site of a known battle. The haunting appeared to be active and intelligent rather than a residual playback of past events. The intelligence displayed by the lights and the reactive nature of the sounds suggested a consciousness that was aware of the family's presence and their attempts to document it. By the mid-90s, the cumulative stress had become untenable. The financial burden of the security systems, the constant repairs, and the medical bills for stress-related conditions weighed heavily on the family. But it was the safety of the children that forced the final decision. The realization that they could not protect their sons from a force that could walk through walls and manipulate electricity was the breaking point. The family made the difficult decision to vacate the property. They sold the log home that had been their dream and moved away from the Black Forest, leaving behind the furniture and the memories of the siege they had endured. The aftermath of their departure was quiet but telling. The house was sold to new owners, and reports of activity diminished but did not vanish entirely. Subsequent occupants reported feeling uneasy in certain rooms and hearing unexplained noises, though the intensity never reached the fever pitch experienced by the previous family. The log home stands today, a private residence in the quiet woods, its history largely known only to those who delve into the archives of Colorado paranormal lore. The photographs, the police reports, and the hours of audio tape remain as a testament to the events of those years. The Black Forest haunting remains one of the most perplexing cases because of the involvement of credible third-party witnesses. The deputies from the El Paso County Sheriff's Department put their professional reputations on the line by filing official reports about unexplained noises and lights. Their testimony removes the possibility of a shared family delusion or a fabrication for attention. These were trained observers tasked with finding logical explanations for civil disturbances who were forced to admit that they were confronting something outside the bounds of normal police work. The image of a uniformed officer standing in a dark living room, listening to footsteps on a roof that he knows is empty, captures the essence of the unresolvable tension at the heart of the case. There was never a definitive conclusion reached regarding the source of the haunting. Skeptics argued that the house settling, combined with underground shifting of the earth and perhaps infrasound from wind patterns, could explain the noises and the feelings of dread. The lights were dismissed by some as reflections from distant headlights or atmospheric phenomena. However, these explanations failed to account for the interactive nature of the events, the way the noises would stop when investigated and resume when the observers retreated, or the specific intelligent movement of the lights in the woods. The physical manipulation of objects and the scratch marks on the husband's back defied geological or meteorological explanations. The narrative of the Black Forest house serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of domestic safety. The home is archetypally a fortress, a place where one controls the environment and locks out the dangers of the world. In this case, the danger was already inside, or perhaps it was the land itself that was hostile. The family did not flee from a criminal or a wild animal, they fled from an intrusion of the unknown into their daily reality. They were forced to accept that the laws of physics and the sanctity of their private space were being violated by a force they could not name, arrest, or shoot. To this day, the area of Black Forest retains an aura of mystery. Locals still speak of strange lights in the tree line and the feeling of being watched when driving the back roads at night. The case of the log home stands as a documented intersection of the physical and the paranormal, a rare instance where the phenomena were loud enough and persistent enough to force the authorities to take notice. It remains an unresolved chapter in the history of American hauntings, a story of a family under siege by forces that refuse to be identified, leaving behind only questions and the silence of the pines. This area isn't on the map. In Lake County, Oregon, a patch of high desert kept showing up in dispatch logs, but never on public maps. In late autumn 2019, Mason Rourke, 34, worked as a utility locator on short contract work near Lakeview. He drove out to confirm buried line markers reported by a ranch foreman during a fence repair. He told a coworker he liked remote jobs because nobody bothered him on the radio. State records later showed his phone last pinged west of town, then went quiet without a final call. Investigators noted the route he described did not match any maintained county road. He was not alone that week, at least on paper, because County File from 2009 listed prior welfare checks in the same area. Those archive notes mentioned a seasonal hunter camp, then crossed out the camp name in pen. Some locals claimed the land was tribal allotment, while others said it was federal grazing lease. Investigators never confirmed ownership boundaries because the parcel data conflicted across agencies. Reportedly, a deputy tried to pull the layer on an in-car system and got only blank tiles. Dispatch logs from the following morning showed a routine call, a stranded motorist near a cattle guard, then a second call about a missing locator. Mason's supervisor, Lena Perez, 29, managed field crews and drove out with printed plats and a handheld receiver. She told state police she expected a quick meetup and a tow, nothing more complicated. Her statement said she reached a windbreak of juniper and found fresh tire tracks turning off into sage. The tracks ended near a shallow wash where the ground hardened, like the vehicle had been carried or turned around. A county sergeant wrote that the scene looked staged, then scratched out the word staged in later copies. The search started as a normal grid, with 2 deputies, 1 volunteer medic, and a rancher who knew the waterholes. They focused on practical hazards, exposure, old wells, and hidden culverts after storms. Reportedly, their radios crackled whenever they tried to call in coordinates, even with line of sight. A deputy logged that his GPS marked a position, but the map page remained empty behind the cursor. Investigators never confirmed the equipment issue because later tests worked fine in the same region. By day 2, they brought in a state K9 unit from Bend, and the handler asked for unwashed clothing. Lena provided Mason's reflective vest from his truck, found parked at a wide turnout of packed gravel. The truck doors were unlocked, the keys were missing, and the fuel gauge showed nearly full. Inside, the passenger seat held a folded county map, but the fold lines did not match the county grid. Some locals claimed it was an old survey sheet, while others said it was just a tourist pamphlet. State records noted the paper had no print date, only a faded legend of symbols. The dog tracked along the wash, then angled toward a low ridge where the sage gave way to pumice and basalt. Dispatch logs recorded the handler saying the scent kept breaking, then returning sharply a few yards away. The handler later described it as stepping stones, not a continuous trail, which she called unusual for flat ground. Investigators never confirmed whether wind shifts caused it because the weather station miles away showed steady direction. Reportedly, a volunteer found a boot print with a lug pattern matching Mason's work shoes, then nothing after that. The print sat in dust that looked undisturbed around it, as if placed rather than walked. On day 3, the county requested aerial support, but the first flight was delayed by a maintenance issue. A second pilot arrived from Medford and flew a wide loop using landmarks reported by ranch hands. He later told state police he could not reconcile the plat coordinates with the visible tracks on the ground. He said he saw a rectangular patch of darker soil like a recently graded pad, yet no equipment marks. Investigators never confirmed grading because soil samples were not taken until weeks later. Reportedly, the pilot's onboard map labeled the zone as unclassified terrain, which staff later said was impossible. Lena remained at the staging point each morning, answering calls and handing out water, while deputies repeated the same ridges. She told an interviewer she felt watched, but she avoided claims she could not prove. County file from 2009 included a similar note stating a deputy felt eyes on him near dusk. Some locals claimed it was just pronghorn on the rise, while others insisted it was squatters near a spring. Investigators never confirmed squatters, and no camp debris was found where locals pointed. State records showed no active permits for temporary structures in that drainage. A break came from a rancher's trail camera that faced a salt lick set near a shallow basin. The camera timestamps were wrong by several hours, according to the rancher, and he said it often happened in winter. One image reportedly showed Mason's truck headlights at night, though the truck was found miles away by daylight. Another frame showed a figure in reflective stripes walking without a pack. Then the next frame was blank static. Investigators never confirmed the figure was Mason because the face was blown out by glare. The rancher admitted he moved the camera after hearing rumors, which complicated the chain of custody. State police requested Mason's phone records and learned he attempted one call to his mother at 6:17 p.m. The call connected for 3 seconds, then dropped with no voicemail and no text afterward. His mother said she heard wind and a faint metallic clink, then silence, and she wrote it down the same night. Some locals claimed that sound was from old cattle bells, though no bells were found during the search. Investigators never confirmed the sound source because the carrier could not provide raw audio. Dispatch logs later referenced a brief unknown transmission, but the recording was overwritten. The county expanded the search perimeter, and a volunteer crew walked a dry creek bed toward a set of basalt outcrops. They found a length of orange marking tape tied to a branch, the kind utility crews use for lines. The tape was clean, not sun-faded, and it hung at eye level as if placed deliberately. Lena said Mason carried similar tape, but she also said every crew did, and it proved nothing. Investigators never confirmed who placed it because wind could not tie a tight knot like that. Reportedly, a deputy marked the spot and later found the tape gone, leaving only a scraped branch. A week after the disappearance, state records showed the case shifted from rescue to recovery. The decision was based on temperature drops and the lack of confirmed sightings beyond the first days. Lena pushed back, asking for one more sweep, and the county approved a limited effort near the darker soil patch. The ground there felt compacted, and one volunteer said it sounded hollow under boots, though nobody dug. Investigators never confirmed hollow ground because later tests with rods met resistance and stopped. Dispatch logs captured a supervisor cautioning against digging due to possible protected cultural sites. That caution fueled gossip, because Lake County has contested histories and people fill silence with stories. Some locals claim the area was a closed research range, while others said it was a private inholding with aggressive patrols. Investigators never confirmed patrols, and no citations were issued for trespass during the search. State records showed one unidentified vehicle reported near a gate, described only as white and dusty. The report lacked a plate number, which deputies explained as poor visibility at dusk. Reportedly, the caller refused to meet an officer and hung up when asked for a name. In early winter, Lena received a brown envelope at her office with no return address. Inside were photocopies of archived notes, including a county file from 2009 she had never seen. The notes referenced a missing surveyor, a broken radio, and a line on the page that read, "Area not on the map." She turned the envelope over to state police, and they logged it as potential hoax material. Investigators never confirmed who mailed it because there were no usable prints on the paper. Some locals claimed a retired deputy kept copies at home, while others said it came from a land office clerk. Reportedly, the photocopies had corner marks from an old machine, matching one at the county annex. The surveyor mentioned in the 2009 notes was named only as J.H., with age listed as 41. State records later linked those initials to a contractor who worked boundary updates near Paisley and Summer Lake. His case file stated he vanished during a solo check of monuments and never returned to his motel. Dispatch logs from that year reportedly included a call about a confusing coordinate that led deputies to a blank area. Investigators never confirmed the blank area detail because the dispatch archive was incomplete. Some locals claimed the surveyor resurfaced years later in Nevada, but no employment records supported it. Mason's own work order did not include that basin, which raised questions about why he drove there. Lena said a ranch foreman called it in directly, and she admitted she did not verify the location against the official utility ticket. The foreman, a man in his 50s, told deputies he only gave Mason a general direction, not a coordinate. Investigators never confirmed the call content because the foreman used a prepaid phone and claimed it was lost. State records showed the number was inactive within days, which looked suspicious to some reviewers. Reportedly, the foreman later refused follow-up interviews and hired a lawyer for unrelated civil matters. When spring arrived, hikers returned to the high desert and rumors followed them in. A backpacker reported finding a rusted stake with orange tape near a rimrock overlook. Deputies checked it and logged it as old survey material, though the tape looked newer than the metal. Investigators never confirmed the age because the stake was not sent to a lab and later went missing from evidence. Some locals claimed the sheriff's office misfiled it, while others said it was returned to the landowner. Dispatch logs show a brief argument between staff about who signed the chain form. Reportedly, the evidence room camera was down that week due to a software update. The case drew a quiet kind of attention, the sort that lives in forums and late-night radio segments. A regional reporter requested records and received heavily redacted pages with entire paragraphs blocked out. State records cited privacy exemptions, yet Mason had no criminal history and no protected witness status. Investigators never explained the redactions publicly, and the county did not comment on mapping anomalies. Some locals claimed there was a federal memo, while others insisted it was ordinary bureaucracy. Reportedly, a staffer mentioned a land management dispute, then stopped answering calls after that. 2 summers after the disappearance, a wildfire burned parts of the basin and exposed older ground. Fire crews from Klamath Falls cut containment lines, and one crew leader filed a note about unusual debris. He described a neat pile of plastic tags and wire flags like utility markers gathered together. The pile sat inside a blackened ring where surrounding brush had burned, yet the tags looked only lightly scorched. Investigators never confirmed the find because the crew demobilized quickly and the item was not recovered. Dispatch logs show the leader tried to report it, but the line was busy during evacuations. Reportedly, a county investigator visited later and found only ash and melted fragments. Lena left the company in 2022 and took a job in Washington, according to licensing records. Before she left, she filed a written statement describing her last conversation with Mason in plain language. She wrote that he sounded normal, that he joked about a road that did not exist, and that he promised coffee after the meet. Investigators never confirmed the road detail because Mason's notes were missing from his truck in his office. Some locals claimed Mason kept a second notebook, while others said the company destroyed it for liability. State records show no subpoena for internal notes, which critics pointed out later. In a final update posted by the sheriff's office, they summarized the case as unresolved and asked for credible leads. The statement referenced reportedly conflicting maps, incomplete dispatch archives, and terrain that complicated ground searches. It also noted that several tips came from people who had never visited Lake County, which investigators dismissed as noise. Some locals claimed the closing language was unusual because it warned against self-directed exploration of the basin. Investigators never clarified that warning, and they did not list specific hazards beyond exposure in old wells. County File from 2009 ended with the same kind of warning, written in different handwriting. Even now, the story persists because it sits at the intersection of paperwork and emptiness. People can accept harsh weather, missed turns, and panic, but they struggle with records that refuse to align. The most consistent evidence remains the simplest: a truck left at a turnout, a call that lasted 3 seconds. Everything else depends on reportedly imperfect logs, archived notes, and county statements that conflict across years. Investigators never confirmed a single defining event, only a pattern of gaps where certainty should be. In Lake County, Oregon, that is enough for some people to say the area isn't on the map. They never found the body. On a cold October weekend in the Sierra foothills near Mariposa, a missing man became paperwork, then rumor, then silence. Reportedly, the last clear sighting ended before noon, and every record after that conflicts in small ways. Dispatch logs show calls, state records show searches, and archived notes show doubts that never made headlines. By the time the county file from 2009 was boxed, they still never found the body. Evan Larkin was 34, a wildfire equipment mechanic from Fresno County, and he drove north for a 2-day solo hike. He told coworkers he needed quiet before the busy winter shop schedule, and he wanted to camp near old burn scars. He wasn't a social media hiker, and he kept his plans to a few plain details. His car was later logged at a trail lot outside Mariposa with a day-use pass and no note. Investigators later wrote that his route choice was unclear because he mentioned 2 different canyons to 2 people. A friend named Miles Ortega was 32, an EMT in Merced, and he expected Evan to text by Sunday afternoon. When no message came, Miles called twice, then checked Evan's last read receipt and saw nothing new. Some locals claimed the area had dead spots for years, but investigators never confirmed a full outage map. Miles waited until Monday morning, then called the Mariposa County Sheriff's Office with Evan's plate number. Dispatch logs reportedly show the call was categorized as welfare, then upgraded after a deputy confirmed the vehicle. The first report noted no forced entry signs and no visible gear outside the car. Deputy Carla Vance was 41, a patrol deputy assigned to the eastern sector, and she drove to the lot before sunrise. She photographed boot prints near the trailhead sign, but the notes admit those prints could belong to anyone. The lot had been used by hunters the prior week, and tire tracks overlapped in a messy fan. A state records entry later stated the temperature dropped into the low 30 seconds overnight, with wind coming down the drainage. Carla radioed for a hasty team, and she flagged the area for search and rescue volunteers. Search teams started with the obvious, following the main trail until it branched into rock and manzanita. Archived notes describe a light smell of smoke in the air, likely from distant prescribed burning. A dog team reportedly alerted near a creek crossing, but the handler later wrote the signal was weak. Some locals claimed they heard a single shout that morning, but investigators never confirmed any independent witness. County file summaries mention that the creek was low, yet slick algae made the stones treacherous. The initial theory focused on a fall because steep granite drops were common beyond the maintained path. Miles arrived that afternoon with a printed photo and a list of Evan's gear based on what he remembered from earlier trips. He said Evan usually carried a compact stove, a headlamp, and a small first aid kit with tape. Carla asked him about injuries, and Miles reported an old ankle sprain that sometimes flared on uneven ground. State records show the search was expanded to include aerial sweeps with a helicopter scanning ridgelines and drainages. The pilot noted glare off stone and patchy shade, conditions that can hide a person even from low altitude. That evening, teams returned to the lot and a deputy logged that Evan's car remained locked. On Tuesday, a second canine team worked the same creek area, and their report differed from the first handler's notes. Dispatch logs show radio traffic about conflicting wind direction, with one team calling it upslope and another calling it down canyon. Investigators wrote that scent work can be unreliable when thermals shift, especially in narrow ravines. Volunteers searched a half-mile below the crossing, checking log jams and deep pools where clothing could snag. They found nothing that matched Evan's pack, and no fabric scraps were logged in the evidence list. Some locals claimed the creek could swallow a body, but the water level readings in state records were modest. By midweek, the search moved outward, because planners assumed Evan either left the drainage or never entered it at all. A ranger from the nearby district, Mark Henley, was 53 and coordinated terrain assignments using old fire maps. Archived notes describe him using burn perimeter lines to predict where brush was thinnest and movement easiest. Teams checked saddles and game trails, places where a tired hiker might drift without realizing it. They also checked roads because disoriented people sometimes head downhill toward noise and pavement. County file notes mention a passing driver report of a man near a turnout, but the time estimate didn't match the known timeline. Investigators never confirmed the sighting because the caller did not stop or take a photo. Miles kept returning to the lot, waiting for updates and scanning the ground like it might change overnight. He asked for phone pings, but records conflict on whether a ping request was approved quickly. A later archived memo says the carrier provided limited data because the phone may have been off. Another state record's entry suggests a single tower connection occurred late Sunday, but the location radius was too wide. Carla documented the uncertainty, and she wrote that the ping information could not direct field teams. Some locals claimed Evan feared technology and might have left his phone behind, but investigators found no phone in the car. The official file lists the phone as missing property, along with his wallet and keys. On Thursday, a volunteer found a shallow scuff in loose dirt near a boulder field, and it was photographed as possible slide marks. A rope team checked below the slope, searching ledges where a person could be trapped out of sight. The team reported loose rock and unstable footing, and they moved slowly to avoid triggering additional falls. Dispatch logs show one medic call for a volunteer ankle injury, which reduced manpower for several hours. Despite the hazard, the rope team finished the grid and found no clothing, no pack, and no blood sign. County file notes later state that scavengers can remove soft tissue quickly, but they offered no confirmed animal evidence. The absence of gear remained a problem, because a fall victim usually leaves something behind. Rain arrived on Friday, and field supervisors recorded that scent conditions degraded and track visibility dropped. Search managers reportedly paused the most technical terrain and shifted to road checks and interviews. Carla visited Evan's landlord in Fresno County, and she confirmed Evan had paid rent and left no sign of moving. A coworker said Evan had been normal at work, though he seemed tired after a late shift earlier that week. Investigators documented no known mental health crisis, and they noted no recent threats or disputes. Some locals claimed that transients used the area, but county file interviews did not link anyone to Evan. By the weekend, the search effort was reduced, and only targeted teams remained active. 2 weeks later, a hunter reported finding a boot print deeper in the drainage, and the report landed in dispatch logs as a delayed lead. The hunter could not describe tread pattern clearly, and rain had softened the ground into a blurred shape. A deputy collected photos, yet the images were too low resolution for comparison to Evan's known boots. Mark Henley wrote in archived notes that late-season prints are often misattributed because many hikers wear similar footwear. Still, teams walked the drainage again, checking bends where items might catch during high water. They found a torn plastic wrapper, but it was not associated with Evan and was logged as incidental trash. County file entries show growing frustration, but the narrative remained controlled and factual. Miles hired a private tracker from the Central Valley, a retired guide who asked to be identified only as RK in notes. The tracker reviewed the terrain and reportedly argued Evan would not choose the steepest route without a clear goal. He focused on a secondary path that paralleled the main trail used by locals for fishing access. Carla allowed the tracker to share observations, but she noted that private leads still required verification. The tracker pointed to a low ridge with several informal spur trails, and he suggested Evan could have looped unintentionally. Teams searched that ridge and found old camp rings, yet no fresh ash or recent food packaging. Some locals claimed the ridge was used for clandestine activity, but investigators never confirmed any criminal pattern there. Months passed, and the file gained small updates that did not change the outcome. A state records entry shows Evan's bank card had no activity after Saturday morning, which suggested he never returned to town. Another record shows a traffic camera hit in Merced County, but it matched a similar vehicle and was ruled out. Carla submitted a missing person bulletin to regional agencies, and it included Evan's height, clothing description, and a tattoo on his left forearm. The bulletin described him as 6 feet tall, with short dark hair, last known wearing a gray jacket and hiking pants. Investigators noted that clothing descriptions can be unreliable because friends often guess based on old trips. Miles later admitted he did not know which jacket Evan packed that weekend. The uncertainty persisted in the official narrative. In early summer of the next year, a creek flood rearranged debris piles and exposed old items downstream. A ranch worker reported a small metal stove near a bend, and deputies responded to collect it. The item matched a common brand, and the serial number could not be traced to Evan. Archived notes show Carla still logged the find because it came from the right drainage and the timing fit. The stove had no clear identifying marks, and no DNA work was recorded in the county file. Some locals claimed the stove was Evan's, but investigators never confirmed ownership. The report ended with a neutral line stating the item could not be associated. Miles asked to see it, and he said it looked similar, but he could not be certain. Another lead came from a hiker who claimed to have spoken to Evan on the trail, describing a quiet man who asked about a shortcut. The witness reported the conversation happened near midday, but the date did not align with weather records. Investigators compared the account to archived notes of trail traffic, and they noted the witness had visited multiple weekends. State records show the witness statement was filed as possible, not confirmed due to timeline conflict. Carla wrote that memory can compress days together, especially after reading public alerts. The witness described a backpack color that did not match Miles's description, adding another inconsistency. Still, the statement kept alive the idea Evan met someone on the trail. County file entries do not claim foul play, but they do not rule it out either. Several investigators returned to the original creek crossing, reviewing photos from the first day and comparing them to later terrain changes. They noticed that the initial boot prints had not been photographed with a scale marker, which reduced their usefulness. Dispatch logs show early radio chatter about multiple groups arriving, suggesting the area may have been contaminated quickly. Mark Henley wrote in an archived critique that early perimeter control is difficult in popular public lands. The team also revisited the car inventory, noting no spare boots and no extra water jugs left behind. They confirmed the trunk contained only a basic roadside kit and some work gloves. The absence of a detailed plan in Evans' notes made route reconstruction speculative. Investigators stated that without a confirmed route, search grids can miss critical pockets. Miles eventually received Evans' personal effects from the sheriff's office, limited to what was left in the car. The list reportedly included a gym bag, a spare shirt, and a receipt from a gas station in Oakhurst. The receipt time was Saturday morning, and it supported the belief Evan entered the area as planned. County file notes mention the clerk remembered nothing unusual because the store served many travelers. Miles kept the receipt anyway, treating it as the last certain timestamp. He also asked for Evan's dental records to be added to databases, and state records show they were submitted. The file later includes a note that unidentified remains cases are compared periodically, though the method is not detailed. Investigators never documented a match in the following years. The lack of remains kept the case in a suspended state. Some locals claimed Evan fell into an old mine opening because the region has historic mining scars. Investigators checked known hazards, and they documented several shafts fenced and posted, but not all were mapped. An archive note says volunteer teams inspected obvious depressions, yet dense brush, limited visibility. A separate memo references ground-penetrating radar requests, but records conflict on whether any survey occurred. State records do show a request for additional resources, followed by a denial due to cost and low probability. Carla wrote that without a narrowed area, specialized equipment would be inefficient. The mine theory stayed in the rumor layer, repeated in diners and trail forums without evidence. County file summaries keep it as an unconfirmed possibility. The official narrative remained that the terrain itself was the primary risk. Another rumor focused on a vehicle seen parked on a dirt spur road, described as a dark truck with no plates visible. A caller reported it days after the search began, and dispatch logs show the tip was entered with a low confidence rating. Deputies checked the spur road and found fresh tire tracks, but the tracks were not unique enough for identification. Archive notes state that seasonal workers sometimes used those roads, and many vehicles carried temporary tags. Investigators canvassed nearby camps, asking about Evan, but no one reported knowing him. Some locals claimed they saw two men arguing near a creek, though the story changed across retellings. Carla documented that no witness provided names and no physical evidence supported an altercation. State records list no arrests or suspects associated with the case. The truck rumor faded, like most rumors do. Years later, the county file from 2009 was referenced again during a review prompted by a new missing person case in the same region. A supervisor compared patterns, noting that both cases involved unclear routes and rapid weather changes. Archive notes emphasize that the landscape can create false certainty because trails appear straightforward until they disappear. They also note that many search hours were concentrated near the creek, based on early dog interest that never repeated strongly. Another internal memo points out that early public messaging may have drawn untracked volunteers, complicating the scene. Dispatch logs from the first week show repeated call-ins from residents, many offering stories rather than evidence. Investigators labeled several tips as inconsistent, but they still recorded them for completeness. The review did not add new facts about Evan, and it did not change the classification. The case remained an open missing person file. Miles moved out of Merced and changed shifts, but he continued to call once a year and ask if anything had been found. Carla transferred to another unit, and her successor inherited a binder with maps, photos, and a thin evidence list. State records show no active search after the first season, only periodic database checks and occasional tip follow-ups. Some locals claim they found bones, but investigators never confirmed those claims as human or connected. When hikers asked about Evan, rangers reportedly answered with safety reminders and kept details minimal. The official file ends many entries with the same sentence: that no remains were recovered. There was never a public closing statement because there was nothing to close. On paper, Evan Larkin is still missing in the Sierra foothills near Mariposa, and they never found the body.